You're watching LeaderCast. I'm Anthony Kovic here on the Hernando Post, and today we are at the Hogan Law Firm on location here in downtown Brooksville, and our guest is Tom Hogan. Tom, thank you for being a guest on LeaderCast.
Yeah, enjoy. Thank you.
You know, being a lawyer, you've had a long experience, and we're going to get into other parts of the legal profession. But tell us, what's the most important part of the legal profession from the perspective of the lawyer?
Well, there's several answers to that, but the most important answer is that the way the Constitution is set up to provide citizens with defenses against an overpowerful government. And so an attorney's job is to make sure that his client's rights are being observed if they're in a confrontational position with the government. The legal system, in my opinion, is one of the center post foundations of our society. We don't go out and settle things in the street. It's not who's the strongest or who's the fastest with a gun. We have a legal system to resolve our disputes, whether they're with the government or whether they're between citizens. And there are a lot of lawyer jokes, but when you get into a position that you need a lawyer, then it's important that you have one that's experienced in the area that you need one for.
Well, absolutely. I mean, whether it's, defense, whether it's providing a will, providing trust, all the legal things, all the documents. The reason why we have a civilized society is we have documents proving all these things, and they have to be generated by somebody that knows what they're doing. Exactly.
And we do a lot of work that does not involve any confrontation with anyone. Like you said, drafting trust, wills, representing businesses and transactions, whether they're between other businesses, mergers, acquisitions. One of the things that I do a lot of is helping people sell their business and getting the maximum value out of it if they're ready to retire. We've done a lot of that over the years. So there's a lot of times that the transactional side of being a lawyer is very rewarding, but it doesn't involve any courtrooms, any Perry Mason moments. None of those things happen.
That's what the excitement is.
That's what people think of when they think of a lawyer, but most of what a lawyer does is in their office and not in the courtroom.
Now you guys have the Hogan Law Firm has two offices, one in downtown Brooksville.
Yes, sir.
And another one on Spring Hill Drive. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Excellent.
That's correct.
And do they both serve the same purposes, or is there a division of activities in each office?
There's a little bit of division of activities. We do most of the transactional work here in Brooksville. In Spring Hill, we do some transactional with real estate. We have an attorney there, Carrie Felice, who's very, very knowledgeable in the real estate area. She came to us from 8 years at the Southwest Florida Water Management District, so she's very, very well versed in the permitting process for our builder clients. So we do a lot of that kind of work out there, but we also have an attorney there that does family law. John Napolitano does our family law, and he's very dedicated to it.
Family law, just to give us, I kind of know what family law is, but give us a little bit of a transactional area of what family law consists of.
Family law consists of everything from adoption to a divorce.
Oh, okay, that kind of family law.
Yes, and he's very good in the courtroom in a divorce setting. When he first gets a case, he tries his best to reconcile the couple and save the marriage. But when that fails, and he's saved quite a few, but when that fails and litigation is the only choice, then he is excellent at that.
Now, you've been in the Brooksville area, Hernando County. How long have you resided as a resident here?
Well, my family goes back here many, many generations, back to before the Civil War.
Oh, really? Not that long?
Or as my grandmother would call it, the War of Northern Aggression. But
Not back to the Spanish colonial
No.
days. No, okay.
Not that far back.
Okay, just making sure.
And they had the livery stable down on Main Street. The building's still there. And just a quick story, ironically, the Lanier livery stable would pick up gasoline at the train depot in a mule-pulled wagon and then deliver it to the people in the county that owned automobiles.
Well, so those were the days when Rockefeller actually shipped the gasoline and kerosene via rail.
Yes, there were no gas stations, and so the gasoline was delivered by a mule-drawn wagon. So it's kind of interesting. Yeah.
You know, like, what was the population back then? I mean, was there, I'm sure there was obviously a school. I mean, Hernando High probably was still around back then.
Sure. Hernando High had been in existence for many, many years, over 100 years. And my grandfather went to Hernando High, and so I did. My children did. My grandchildren are going there now. When I graduated from high school in 1972, there were 17,000 people in the entire county.
Wow.
To give you an idea of how much the county has changed since that time.
Now, do you think it's changed for, you know, give us your perspective, 17,000 people, this area was pretty much farmland, is that correct?
That's correct. It was mainly ranching, farming, and mining.
Now, you have some ranching stories to tell us. So
Sure.
Tell us a little bit about your ranching stories.
Well, when I was growing up in high school and through college, I worked for Lykes Brothers, and they are one of the leading pioneer cattle families in the state of Florida. We had as many as 15,000 head of cows here in this county. It was a cow-calf operation. And
yeah, very few people know that Florida is, I think, the second largest cattle state next to Texas.
That's correct. Still is. Yeah, still is. And so I did I got on a horse almost every day unless I was doing fencing work. And we did roping, branding, all the things that you think of when you think of a cowboy. Things hadn't changed.
So the cowboy lawyer guy.
That's right. I wanted to be a cowboy growing up, you know, and then so I got to live that dream for those 8 years. But breaking a few bones kind of wakes you up to the fact that you better get an education.
Now, when you doing cattling, or cowboying and driving cattle, did you travel the parts of the state, or was it, you know, corralled already and just moving it from one small area to another?
They were moved from relatively small areas, but Lykes owned thousands of acres, so it was quite a bit of land to cover. And there were ranches that were ranch properties that were disconnected. So we drove cattle across Fort Dade Avenue, for example. Before I started working for them, they routinely drove cattle across Highway 50. But we would move cattle by truck sometimes from property to property. The days of driving cattle from Brooksville to Tampa for shipment to Cuba predated me.
Wow. I mean, what we think of cattle, you know, cowboying and cattle ranching, we think of Texas and bringing them all the way to Kansas City.
Right.
Where they were then slaughtered and sold all the way to the Northeast and other parts of the country. But you don't think of it as Florida as the place where cattle ranching is one of the largest next to Texas as far as cattle driving.
It is, and we had our moments in our smaller cattle drives, but Florida's fencing law didn't take effect until 1948. And so it took many years after that before people actually fenced their property. So there was still a lot of open range.
Yeah, the barbed wire pretty much ended.
That ended it. That ended it. But a lot of people back in those days, the old timers told me, people were in the cattle business that didn't own any land. They would just buy cows, brand them, and turn them loose in the county, and then go try to round them back up and sell them when they had calves.
When you can find them, right?
Right.
Where do they go?
Exactly.
They didn't have the GPS tags, right?
No. But we chased cows. I chased cows from Highway 41 all the way to Highway 19 through what is now Spring Hill. So things have changed quite a bit.
Yeah, you won't find the cows roaming through Spring Hill
No.
anymore.
No.
Though I think all the way up on California Street, there's still a few cows
There may be.
across the street from the high school and grammar school over there, Chocochatty.
Yeah.
So if you want to see some cows in the Spring Hill area, well, I think it's still considered Brooksville, past on that part, is it?
California Street.
California all the way
considered
through?
the border, I think. The official city limits line is before you get to the Brooksville Hospital, which is now changed names, and I can't think of
Yeah,
it.
but to the airport, is that considered still Spring Hill? I believe it's still Spring Hill. I think the city ends at where on the plantation.
Past Southern Hills.
Yeah, Southern Hills, right around there, they annexed Southern Hills. So there are still cows in Spring Hill, right on California.
Yes, sir.
And
Oh, yeah.
Spring Hill Drive.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. So you decided to become a lawyer. Is that where did that come from? Did you have any history in the legal, as far as family wise, or is
Yes.
it just that the legal profession interests you?
My father is a pharmacist and had a drugstore here for 47 years, but chemistry wasn't my thing.
Ah, yes.
And so my uncle is an attorney in Clearwater, and when I was a younger kid, I would go down and visit him in the summers, and he would take me to court with him, and I was intrigued by that. And so when I decided to go on to college and beyond, I decided to go to law school and became an attorney.
Nice. Do you? I make it a point to every now and then go to the courthouse and watch some of the proceedings on occasion. It is interesting to see some of the squabbles that we here in Spring Hill actually go through, and it is the procedures, the bailiff, you next. What are you doing here?
Right.
Usually when I come in with a camera, it's like, you can't use the camera. It's like, it's not on, it's in the bag. But, so what was your first job as an attorney? Did you practice a specific type of law? Let me ask you, what is your specialty of law practice that you enjoy the most, actually?
That I enjoy the most now is the business transactions. I like to help people, especially in the sale of their business that they've started. Most of my clients are small businesses, and I think our biggest business is a 300 employee business, but most of them are small mom and pop type businesses that we
like 10, 15
10,
employees.
15, 20, 50. But they usually are entrepreneurs that started the business themselves, and so when it comes time to retire, if they don't have a child that wants to take over the business, then they want to go in the market and sell it. And that's very rewarding when you can help somebody get the value of their maybe 30, 40 years of work, and give them enough money that they can enjoy a retirement. That's rewarding. I enjoy that. I also enjoy helping people set up a new business and explaining to them how to keep their liabilities separate from their personal life, their business liabilities separate from their personal liabilities. It's very, very important.
Seal, maintain the corporate seal.
Maintain the corporate entity. Maintain the identity. Don't cross. Don't commingle. So I have a standard 20-minute speech I can give you on that. But I enjoy that. I enjoy. I just enjoy helping people, and at the same time, it's afforded me a nice living. So
now, it didn't start that way. Did you start off as a prosecutor?
Yes.
Taking you to the prosecuting days.
Well, what took me there was when I graduated from law school, I just made an assumption that my uncle was going to hire me in his business law firm. And when I went to see him, sort of like, where's my office going to be?
Yeah, like, what office?
Yeah, he said, exactly. He said, you need some trial experience. And he picked up the phone and called the state attorney's office in Pinellas County, where he lives in Clearwater, and set up an interview for me. And they hired me. And I had no idea that I avoided criminal law in law school, took the bare minimum courses, but when I got into it, I really enjoyed it and ended up staying in it for 8 years.
So 8 years. So tell us a little bit about criminal justice law. Most people, I mean, we see the stuff on TV, but TV is drama. It's not the paperwork that we know that the legal profession is.
Well, it's what I always get a kick out of on TV dramas is that there will be a shooting or some sort of a battery or something, and the courtroom, you'll see the trial, and the injured person's still wearing the bandages and the blood's still seeping through.
Yeah, most of that usually just place like 9 years later.
Yeah, right. Maybe not 9 years, but usually it's a year later if it's especially if it's a major crime. And I was fortunate enough to get experience right away in some major criminal work. I did a few DUIs and trespassing and those kind of things, but I caught a break and got promoted to felonies quickly. Over the course of my career, I prosecuted 17 first-degree murders.
Oh, wow.
A lot of major drug cases. A big drug case out of Chicago where the people that were selling the drugs into Florida were from Chicago, and they were selling it in by the truckload, by the semi-tractor trailer load.
Tractor-trailer load, wow.
And I was able to try that case, and those guys looked, just like me. They were young guys. They came to court in button-down collars and nice suits, and they were out on bond.
The other lawyer dressed them up.
Yes. Well, I think that's the way they dressed.
That's how they ran their business.
That's how they ran their business.
Just like the lawyers, right?
Yeah, and they were out on bond, and so they would see me in the hallway, and they would say, "Hey, Tom, where are we going to go to dinner tonight?" And things like that. So
yeah, I don't think they meant going to.
No. I got several death threats during that trial.
So you've had to deal with a lot of that stuff. So tell us about the death threats. How do they influence these situations when major drugs, major cartel type organized crimes really lean on the local prosecutor, especially in a small town?
Well, it's a scary situation because there's no way that you can be protected 24/7. I carried a gun at the time. In fact, when I transferred from Pinellas to Hernando County, Judge Huffstetler, the first time I was in court, called me up to the bench and said, are you carrying a gun? And of course I said, "No, sir." And he said, "Well, you better get one."
Yeah.
So,
You're like, what?
Yeah, right. It was sort of a little bit wild here back then. But in this particular drug case I was talking about from Chicago, I got phone calls at night, 2 o'clock in the morning, where they would say, "Is this Tom Hogan?" And I'd say, "Yes." And they'd say, "You're dead." And I would report it the next day of course I didn't sleep anymore that night, but
yes.
I'd report it the next day. But there was, other than, there's very little they could do. You can't be protected 24/7. So.
Well, I mean, that's why the state of Florida is. I think we just surpassed the state of Texas as the #1 permitted gun-holding permitted state.
Yes, I think that's right. But and also during that same time on the state of...
We surpassed Texas.
That's a big one.
I mean, that's saying a lot.
Yeah. But I have a lot of clients that come here for concealed weapon permits, and we arrange it for them. But anyway, back to that case, I had one other incident that I think is kind of funny. I was living in Bel Air Beach at the time, and in a condo, and my neighbor, I was on the second floor, and my neighbor downstairs couldn't sleep, so she was up cleaning her fish tank, and she saw someone on my back porch trying to break in the sliding glass door. She called me, told me that, and I told her to call the Bel Air Police Department. I jumped up and ran out with my gun and started looking around. She came out and was helping me, holding on to my arm, but helping me look. And then a few minutes later, the police came roaring up with their big spotlights, and all they saw was, me in a pair of boxers and her in her nightgown, me holding a gun. And so that took a little bit of explaining. But the guy almost got in. The door was pried pretty much open. Luckily, she was awake and called me in time.
Now, so you've had to deal with these experiences. Are these normal for people in the legal profession? I'm not saying every day, but...
No, it's not normal, and it's, I don't know. I know a few other people who have been shot or shot at attorneys. Ironically, most of those are in domestic divorce cases.
Yes, I mean, the one thing that the police officers don't like is domestic
calls.
Because you never know. You're trying to help one, but then they both attack you.
That's the most dangerous call. That's where the most times police officers are injured. Yeah, domestic.
Yeah. So what's the most weirdest thing that you've observed as the prosecutor?
Oh gosh, the weirdest. We prosecuted here in Hernando County a pornographic movie studio that was set up in a house out in Spring Hill. That was pretty bizarre.
Was this long ago?
This was in the 80s.
Oh, okay, 80s.
In the 80s.
You would think that in this day and age, that's like almost daily.
Yeah, but that was back then, and it was bizarre, and the stories aren't probably fit for your show. But then some of the drug cases were bizarre, some of them were humorous, and that a lot of times the police would ask me to go with them on an arrest warrant that I wrote for drugs. For example, we went to a house where there was a guy that was selling drugs. The house is still here on Highway 50. And we got there, and sure enough, the house was loaded with cocaine and marijuana and paraphernalia. And so they were in the process of inventorying these things, and this gentleman was handcuffed and taken away. And while they were there working, the phone rang, so I answered it. And
was that drug dealer?
Yeah, the man on the other end of the line said, "Is Jimmy there?" And I said, "No, he's not here right now. Can I help you?" He said, "Well, you're supposed to have a package for me." And I said, "Oh yeah, sure. Come on over." So
I'm going to pick it up. We have it for you.
So they hit all the police cars, and this guy shows up, and one of the undercover officers sold him a bunch of drugs, and then arrested him. So.
Well, that must have been like one of those interesting cases where they just show up and they arrested him. Wow.
Yeah, it falls into your lap sometimes.
Now, have you had any Perry Mason style court cases where what's a court case like? Take us through when you're in court and you're doing what a lawyer, well, the prosecutor at this case, we're still talking about you as the prosecutor. In
the prosecutor side is where I had a lot of trials. Over the course of my career, I probably had over 100 jury trials, but
wow.
The majority of them were when I was a prosecutor, because you just have one after another. But a Perry Mason moment that comes to mind is I was prosecuting a case for dealing in stolen property. And it's a second-degree felony in Florida, which means the maximum is 15 years. It's a very serious crime to sell property that you know is stolen. And so I was prosecuting this gentleman for stealing a lot of stolen stereo equipment and other computer equipment from the victim's home. And naturally, his claim was he had no idea it was stolen. Even though he bought it for pennies on the dollar out of the trunk of a car.
That was clue number one, right? Yes.
But I went to, on the third day of the trial, I went up after lunch, and there was this young kid, standing in the hallway, and he asked me, "Is this the State versus Jones courtroom?" And I said, "Yes, it is." And he said, "Oh, I'm here to testify in this case." And I said, "Oh, is that right?" And he said, "Yeah, I'm the guy that sold Mr. Jones the stolen equipment. I just got out of prison for the burglary." And I said, "Oh well, I'm glad. Good for you. Glad you're out."
Yeah, that's going to definitely help his case, right?
I hope you turned your life around. And I said, let me ask you something. Did Mr. Jones have any idea this stuff was stolen? He said, of course he did. He knew it was hot as could be. And just going on and on. And I said, okay. So we go into court a little while later, and he's called as a defense witness, and he gets up and says, oh, Mr. Jones had no idea this property was stolen. I sold it to him. I sell a lot of equipment, so he had no idea. And so then they say, cross-examination. So I go to the podium, and I could see him looking at me like, oh man. And I said, do you remember me? And he said, yes. And I said, have you been telling the truth in here? And he said, oh.
So, understand.
Yeah, that was my most dramatic as far as being a Perry Mason moment, getting somebody to break down on the witness stand.
And actually admit it in open court.
Yes, that it was stolen, that the defendant knew it was stolen, and it was, of course, a lot of objecting and yelling and screaming, but it was... naturally, we did get a conviction. So.
Let's take you from being the prosecutor, and how did you transition to private practice?
There were two things going on in my life at the time. And one of them was that when I was prosecuting one of my last murder cases, I noticed that I wasn't getting that real adrenaline rush from it. And also my kids got tired of hearing the stories about crime. And then the final deciding point was that the state attorney that I worked for was not reelected.
Oh, okay.
And I had become, I don't know, somewhere up in the management level of the state attorney's office, which there's sort of an unwritten rule that you go out, you leave with the state attorney, so the losing state attorney. So I thought about staying in prosecution, but I would have to commute to either Tampa or back to Clearwater and possibly Pasco. But I decided to open my own office and hung out a shingle and waited for the phone to ring.
Now, was your first office here in Brooksville?
Yes, it was.
In the same very building? Or?
No, it was over on Main Street, just around the corner from where we are today. I was there I started there in '89, and was in that location less than a year. It was a rented space, and I bought this building, and we moved in here right at the end of 1989, the last part of December of '89.
Now, this is more like an older building. What was it before you turned it into a legal firm?
Well, this building was built in 1913, so you're right, it's an older building. And this was built as the second Ford dealership in the state of Florida.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So we have a lot of fun talking about the history of the building, and we have enjoyed being in this building immensely. It's just down less than a block from the courthouse. It's an old building which has all of the trials and tribulations of an old building, but we've enjoyed it.
I mean, inside it's all modern, with the exception of the facial and probably some, construction that holds the building up. Plumbing, I'm sure.
Well, there's some plumbing stories, but when I bought the building, we gutted it and rebuilt. The whole interior was redone. Nice.
So, when it comes to let's see. What areas does your attorneys cover? How far from Brooksville, Spring Hill does the legal practice actually practice law?
Well, we do a lot of work in Citrus. Outside of Hernando, we do a lot of work in Citrus, Sumter, some in Pasco. I have had litigation for clients that own businesses here, but if they sell products nationwide, for example, I've had to have defend them in litigation, and I've been temporarily admitted in Arizona, Texas, Louisiana, New York, Michigan.
When you say temporarily admitted, so if for you to practice law in another state, you have to have a special permit to allow you to go for a client that may be in your state?
Right. It's okay. The Latin is pro hoc vice, and you go and you apply to the court for a temporary admission. You show that you're an attorney in good standing in Florida, and most states will admit you in their state strictly for that case.
So just for the case.
Just for that case.
Can't
right.
take on any more cases.
You can't take on any other projects.
That's
right.
their local lawyers. Now, how many lawyers are part of the firm itself?
Right now we have 7. We've had as many as 10, 11, 12, but when in the economic downturn, we kind of downsized a little bit, went into some government work because we primarily I was primarily representing builders for many years and businesses, and when the business side dried up, and unfortunately most of my builder clients filed for bankruptcy. So I could see that coming, fortunately, and we transitioned into some government law, and we represented the city of Port Richey for a while. We don't anymore. We represented the city of Brookfield for 10 years. I resigned from that a couple years ago. We still represent city of Crystal River. We represent Sumter County. It's one of our bigger clients. We represent the Construction Licensing Board in Sumter County, Planning and Zoning in Sumter County, Supervisor of Elections. Here in Hernando, we represent, I have done a lot of work for the Sheriff's Office. We represent the Property Appraiser. I represented the Clerk's Office for many, many years. And, you know, when a lawyer makes law, that's a big deal. So I did make some law for the clerks around the state, which was very much appreciated. We were able to win on a case and win on appeal that the draft notes of a clerk's audit are not public record. They don't become public record until the final version of the audit is published. And so the legislature had to go back and rewrite Statute 119 to incorporate that case.
Interesting.
So I did make a little law in my career. So that's a good little star to hang on your.
Well, very nice. Now, you were also on the Larry King Show.
Yes.
Now, were you in private practice, or were you the prosecutor at
No, I
that
was
time?
in private practice.
So how did you ended up on the Larry King Show?
Well, that's a very interesting story. Start out there. I got a phone call from a woman who wanted to talk to me about a probate case, but she would only come to my office after 5, after the office was closed. So I thought, oh boy,
This is interesting.
this is going to be interesting. You're right, but I had just gone into practice.
Sheriff's office.
Exactly. I had just gone into practice, and so I was pretty much taking whatever came through the door. So I agreed to meet with her, and she came in, and she was very demure, very quiet, very attractive woman, but I could tell that she was not really telling me what she really wanted to tell me. And I kept reassuring her about the attorney-client privilege and so forth.
Well, not to cut you off there before you continue the story, tell us about the attorney-client privilege, because most people don't understand it entirely.
Anything that you tell your attorney, the simplified version is anything that you tell your attorney cannot reveal to anyone. Another attorney, a judge.
Not even in the firm itself?
Well, within the firm, you can confer with the other attorneys, but they're also bound by that same attorney-client privilege. And that's one of the benefits of having a firm, is that you have a brain trust to work with, but they're all bound by that privilege as well, and nobody can get that information out of you. And if they do, then you're in big trouble with the bar. So.
Okay, so sorry to cut you off on that. I thought that was something that people should hear it from a lawyer himself.
Yeah, well, it's very important. It's a very important thing, and sometimes you hear things that you don't want to hear.
Yeah, because it's the importance is to make sure that other entities, whether it's government, whether it's other people trying to get the information out of you, via other legal means that makes it difficult to have those conversations if you can then, chirp like a canary.
Well, if that were the case, then no client would ever tell you the truth, and so you wouldn't know, what you were dealing with. So the client has to be able to trust you and tell you the truth, so that you can position them in the best possible posture for them to get a positive or the best possible result from their situation. Otherwise, you would have there would be very little effectiveness in the representation of clients, especially in criminal cases.
I mean, I think many of the places around the world, I don't think that option is available.
No, it's not. And
it's like, yeah, you did it later.
We're going to subpoena your attorney.
Your lawyer just basically just puts you in jail.
Right. So our Constitution is a very important document, and I cringe every time somebody describes it as a living document. I'm a strict constitutionalist. It means what it says and says what it means, and I think we should stick to it.
Yeah, when you look at it, like, which version of the living part are we going to apply today? And that's the whole point, because today it's whoever is in politics running something. Are they the ones that are going to make it apply? The living version of today's note, rather than what it was actually said.
Well, that's right. And I don't want somebody in Washington who's been elected from California to be deciding what the Constitution means and interpreting what the Founding Fathers must have meant when they wrote something. It's not a living document. It's down in black and white, and it says what it means.
Exactly. I mean, it's ink.
It's inked in and signed by John Hancock and the rest. So.
Yes, I mean, we know that our representatives today do sign these papers, but the Constitution is the only one that we can see all the signatures.
Yes.
Where today is just another mountain of paper.
Right. And what we have to hope for is that if they enact an unconstitutional law, that it makes its way through the court system, and that a judge, maybe the Supreme Court, some judge will say this is unconstitutional, and that law will be thrown out. And that's what we have to hope for, and that's why we have a separation of powers from the legislative branch to the administrative branch, the judicial branch. And as a lawyer, I'm part of the judicial branch, so it's an important role.
Exactly. All of these pieces make what is America.
Yes, sir.
And why everyone wants to at least maybe not flock here, because not everybody's, most nations do have, good people doing good stuff. Mm-hmm. But very few people are running there.
Right.
And if they are, they're getting kicked out.
Right. It's, I've had a chance to do some international law and travel, and it's scary when you get into a foreign country and you realize that, you don't have your constitutional rights.
There's no constitution.
Right. And I've had clients that get upset about something that's happening while we're in a foreign country, and I have to calm them down and say, look, we don't live here. We don't have any constitutional rights here. Somebody could throw us in jail and we could be forgotten. So
exactly, because that's what a living document is.
Yes, that's the living document.
If you want a living document in your Constitution, go to some of these other countries that, draft 1 million is now applying.
Right. Yes.
Where the last draft, which sets you free, doesn't apply, right?
It doesn't apply anymore because we've decided that it doesn't mean that. It means that you can be thrown in jail. So you don't want that.
So when the guys in the wigs, those, judges with wigs, which doesn't make any sense to me, but
me either.
So you were telling me the story about you're up, you got on the Larry King show, so. So
Okay.
she called,
And
met with her.
She finally decided to trust me, and she told me this story that she was married to a man who worked at and was a partner in an auto body shop in Providence, Rhode Island, and that she had 3 kids. And then one day, all of a sudden, the doors were all kicked in on her house, and a SWAT team rushed in and arrested her husband as a mob hitman and took her into protective custody. So she and her children lived in the Providence Police Department jail, a part of the jail that was no longer being used for their own protection. And I'm thinking, oh boy, I stayed here late, to hear this wacko story. And she went on, and she had finally decided that she couldn't take it anymore in the jail, and she had come down to Florida to, her parents lived out in Hillendale, and she was living out there with them and with her kids, and that her husband was being allowed. Now he had decided to become a state's witness, and he was given freedom to leave the jail, to come down and visit, and all these Providence police officers were coming with him and going to Disney World and all, and they had videotape of all this. She brought me all these videotapes. I still have them. But that night I thought, okay, I've wasted 3 hours here. So the next day I got to, before I could do anything to check out her story, the Providence State Police were in my office.
Were they track her down?
Yes, they were here, and they said, they wanted me to work with them, that she was in a lot of danger because the mob bosses that her husband had put in prison wanted to get to her to kill her so she couldn't repeat whatever stories he had told her, and then they were going to try to get him as well, of course. And so I had this dilemma on my hands, and to get to sort of cut to the chase, it was getting to be a very dangerous situation. During this time period, 11 Providence police officers died under mysterious conditions.
Wow.
Her husband, they let him go whenever he wanted to. He was allowed to check out of jail and go skydiving.
Wow.
And
Providence, that's not in Boston, right?
No, it's in Rhode
governor,
Island.
I know. It's just
Yeah.
Governor, he ran for president, I forget where, he furloughed a lot of people.
Yeah. But we
Dukakis, yes.
yeah, Dukakis. Yeah, that was Massachusetts.
Yes.
But we went up to Providence, the client and I, on a couple of occasions to court, and she did testify for the prosecution, which put her in further danger. And so the only thing I could think of that would make her her life, killing her wouldn't be worth anything, was if she told everything she knew to as many people as she could tell. And so we agreed to do all the interviews that would be requested, and there were a lot of local Providence police, television stations would call. We would go down to Tampa where they had satellite hookups, and we would be interviewed.
The local PBS over there? Is it the local PBS? I know that they use that one a lot.
I don't know. And we were on ABC, NBC.
Yeah, okay.
So they would satellite from Tampa back up to Providence, and she did a lot of shows that way. And then Larry King picked up on it and called one day and said, well, his producer.
Now, is it legal? So let's say her story that she's being hounded and probably contracted to be murdered.
Right.
If the story is in the public domain via Larry King,
right,
does that make it admissible as in a case?
It would, under several different scenarios under the evidence code of Florida anyway. It's a statement recorded, if she was killed, you would have a statement that was recorded of hers. You could use it for impeachment purposes of another witness. But mainly, if the information that she had gets out enough, then killing her is not going to stop. It's not going to hush it up.
Yeah, because it's already out there. What's the point now?
Right. So,
I mean, what I'm saying is, unless if it's not admissible as like a document would be, then the person itself has to be in court compared to the content that she's already laid out.
The Constitution, Bill of Rights, guarantees that we have the right of cross-examination.
Yes.
So if a witness is dead, and all you have is a videotape of their a digital
testimony
recording of their testimony, and it was on a TV show, then there was no cross-examination. Larry King does not count as a cross-examiner.
That's true.
So it's difficult to get it admitted into evidence because the defendant doesn't have a right to cross-examine the video. But there are circumstances under which the evidence code may allow that video to come in, like I said, for impeachment purposes, for example. But the main thing is that there were no more secrets. All the secrets that she knew, she told to Larry King, Sally Jesse Raphael, Bill O'Reilly. They sent a crew down here, and we set up a little studio in my office. So
kind of like this.
Just kind of like this, and so we got her story out there enough that then the threats went away. And
is she still alive and kicking?
Yes, she remarried, and
maybe we shouldn't tell that.
No, she's it's no secret. I don't think she's living happily. I hear from her once in a while.
Oh, very interesting.
Yeah.
So do you keep in touch with any of the clients from back then that has some interesting stories? A lot outside of this one, obviously.
A lot of people come in and out of your life, and you stay in touch with them for a while, but then time goes on, and you lose track of them. But some of them you stay in touch with maybe because the case lives on, like a murder case in Florida seems to never go away. I got 5 death penalty cases, and those cases seem to have another never-ending.
So, actually, let's dig into that, because that's interesting. When you're in a case that continues to provide dividends, so to speak, because they're still in the docket, or the person is still in jail and they're filing appeals and things like that.
Right.
You, as a lawyer or the prosecutor, do you have to re-prosecute, or the prosecutor that is currently running the office takes care of that?
Well, almost in every example, if the case is overturned, the current prosecutor would prosecute the case. There are rare occasions when they may bring back somebody from private practice and reinstate them temporarily to prosecute a case. On the few cases that I've had that were overturned, I was called to help the prosecutor prosecute
to fill
the
in
case.
the gaps that are missing in the notes.
Right, but basically they just go back through the transcript and put the case back on in front of the judge, fixing whatever the issue was. I haven't had any cases overturned except for one, because some of the scientific evidence that I introduced, there's now a cloud on that type of blood typing.
Okay.
And so that case was overturned, and I'm helping the current prosecutor with that case. But but in one of the cases that I had, which I prosecuted in 1982, and this man murdered a cab driver who was just out of the service from Vietnam. He was a jet pilot, fighter pilot. He was trying to make extra money to start his own flight school, was murdered for his cab money that he had in the cab, which was only a couple $100. But I became pretty close friends with his parents during the preparation for and during the trial of the case. That defendant is still on death row from the prosecution, but they continually bring up issues, and when we go back to court, his mother faithfully appears in court, even though she lives in Tucson, Arizona. She still flies back to Pinellas County, and I see her, and I get Christmas cards from her and things like that.
So that is interesting. Now, how long can a case continue on? Can a defendant that's already been prosecuted, convicted, appeal? How long does that process continue on?
I don't know, but I know that it can go on for at least 37 years or whatever that is, since 1982.
So 37 years you've been dealing with
yes,
a
this
recurring
same
case.
individual has drugged me into court, accusing me of all kind of things, hiding evidence, misleading, and it's always blatantly false, and I'm always exonerated every time, but they come up with something new. This last time was they went through my handwritten notes, and they found an offensive word, a racial word.
So that means you didn't kill him, right?
Yeah, exactly. But when I got to court, I guess their argument was something that I was a racist, and I had prosecuted this individual because he was an African American, and I pointed out to him when I got into court and to the judge that yes, it was my handwritten notes, and yes, I had written that word, but if you read the paragraph in context, I was quoting the defendant. He used the word, and so I was quoting him, and there are quote marks around that sentence. And as soon as the judge saw that, of course, he threw the whole thing out, and it was over. But
you were making notes of the defendant's
statements.
presentation and
Yes,
statements.
yes.
Was this on the stand, or was it in the...
It was in his interview when he was being interviewed as a possible suspect.
So all the notes. So in a case like for the prosecutor, all the pieces of the case, including the notes, everything that is collected is part of the open book for the defense. Is that correct?
When the case is over, that becomes public record, yes.
It's not for... Now, the defendant's, the defendant's lawyer doesn't have access to that information?
He has access to almost everything, but not what's called work product. In other words, if I'm writing out an outline of how I intend to present the case, my trial strategy.
Okay,
that's work product.
Okay, so but all the other pieces collected, all of that has to be compiled for the defense to review.
Yes, after the case is over, then everything in the file becomes public record, and they scrutinize it, believe me, with a microscope, and if they can find anything that they can somehow develop an argument about, they will do it. And I call it being sued, but I've been drug into court by these death penalty defendants over and over and over. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say I prosecuted a police officer over in Mascot for killing a little girl, murdering a little girl while he was on duty, and convicted him. And they drugged me back into court years later because one of the pieces of evidence was a hair, and there was some dispute about whether that was properly analyzed, and the FDLE hair analyst had said it couldn't be matched. The FBI hair analyst that I used said it could be matched, and so we went back into court over that, and it was suggested then, we didn't have DNA back then, so it was suggested in court that if there's a dispute, why don't we do a DNA test? And the defense counsel and the defendant had a little huddle, and they said, no, we don't want to do that.
Yeah, it's like, it looks like my hair, we don't want to do that.
So that case I haven't heard any more from them, but he's still on death row. There have been 5 books written about that case, so it's a very interesting case.
Now, when it comes to you relitigating some of these cases that you have to go back to court, does the state provide you with compensation for going back and having to redo these things? Because you were doing them as the official prosecutor for the state.
Yes.
What's that mean now if you have to go back?
It means that it cost me a lot of time and money because they don't pay you. They subpoena you.
So the state subpoenas you, or the
Yes.
prosecutor?
Usually the state subpoenas you, or in this most recent case, both the state and the defense attorney subpoenaed me. I spent a day being deposed, and then I spent 2.5 hours on the witness stand being.
So you have to do this at your own expense,
Yes.
time,
Yes.
and
Yeah.
whatever
Yes.
out of your schedule to go and be the witness, the state's witness.
Yes. And to be effective, if it's something that happened 25, 30 years ago, I have to read the transcripts of what happened, or I have a pretty good memory, but
Yeah, you have to know all the details because they're going to ask you every little crumb that took
yes,
place.
and if you make a mistake, they're going to jump all over it. So you better know what you're talking about.
So that's a permanent thing. Wow, I mean that's interesting that someone who is a prosecutor can now, all the cases can come back ongoingly for pretty much the rest of your life, basically.
It seems like it. It seems like the rest of your life. I mean,
Do your kids have to actually, come to these proceedings too? Because it almost,
yeah, almost.
they might have to call them up too. Yeah,
yeah. They've never come to court. My mother's come to court and watched a couple of my cases, but my kids, they just accept it as part of life. I had when I was in private practice, I had a case that got national attention, and Fox News came to the house and set up a studio.
Oh, nice.
And my kids went to Wendy's to get something to
It's
eat.
like
They're
just-
not impressed.
Once they've been around it for a long time, it's just another game to them.
Yeah.
Oh, very nice. Now, when it comes to, these kind of litigations, what's the stress like? When it comes to dealing, because you're handling the lives of people.
You're either handling the lives of people, if it's a criminal case, or you're handling somebody's financial life. If you're in a business situation, it's very stressful, and you don't get much sleep. If you're doing a good job, in my opinion, and I've done a lot of teaching to young attorneys, prosecutors, and in the private sector, and the only thing that I tell them that is consistent is that if you want to be a lawyer and you want to be a good lawyer, then don't think of this as a 40-hour-a-week job, because it's not. It's a way of life, and you have to live it.
They're still hounding you for stuff.
Well, that's right, and you have to live it, and you have to be prepared when you go to court, and that means you have to spend the hours and hours in preparing and knowing what you're talking about when you get there. And you have to know the rules of evidence, because you have to be able to make a snap decision whether to object or not, and then you have to know what the grounds are for your objection.
So let's get in a little bit of that, because that's interesting. The rules of the courtroom when it comes to knowing, I mean, like you said, objecting or whatever it is in the courtroom that you have to do, whether or not the prosecutor or the defendant, what they're saying. Mm-hmm. If they're saying the wrong thing, whether they're leading, whether they're doing all these interesting things, as well as site-specific case law that supports what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Is that where the real money in the case is, making sure you have all those details where the paralegals are managing all this information for you? So this way, when you go to that case and you're in front of that jury or whatever, you have all the supporting data that makes your case work.
Well, my first rule is you better know the rules of evidence. If you have to turn to a paralegal and say, is this objectionable, it's too late. Yeah. I mean, the question's been answered, the jury's heard it, and the case has moved along, and once none of their questions asked, a judge is not interested in going back. And there's a sort of a saying that once the bell's been rung, you can't unring it. And so as soon as that question comes out,
you have to know all. I mean, that's what I'm saying. Like, when being prepared is all of that stuff. Making sure all the case law that supports whatever your defense or
Yeah.
whether you're the prosecutor. So when you're having the dialogue in the courtroom, because every part, it's that split second that makes the case a
Right.
winner or a loser.
Well, you have to know, as we were talking about a little bit earlier, like a document, if the other attorney tries to introduce a document into the trial, into the discussion, shows it to a witness, you better jump up and say, objection, I need to see that document, or you better have seen it in the discovery process and be able to say, look, Judge, I can't cross-examine that document, and my client has a right, constitutional right to cross-examination. And so if you allow this document to go before the jury, then you've violated my client's constitutional rights. You have to have that split-second knowledge of that, whether that's admissible or not, and you have to know hearsay. If someone starts talking about, well, so-and-so told me this, or I heard this, you better jump up and stop it, right then.
So that's the premise of the legal system. It's those split decisions that determine whether or not the case goes one way or another.
Yes.
Like just submitting this document, it could just be garbage.
Right. Who knows?
But
you have to know who
it could
generated
be a blank
it.
piece
Right.
of paper.
Yeah.
And saying, hey, this is what happened, but what was said is now part of the record.
Yes.
Even if it just had their name on it.
Right.
So that's the kind of stuff that you're constantly having to be aware of in the case itself.
Exactly. And I got a funny story about that. If you want to I can interject it.
Stories are great.
I used to, especially in death penalty cases, in picking a jury, it's called voir dire, I would always ask potential jurors what church they went to and if they had any religious opposition to imposition of the death penalty. And a few years later, the Florida Supreme Court came out with a case that said you couldn't do that anymore and talk about religion anymore. So we had the next time a murder case came up, and it was a very good attorney who later became a circuit judge, and he's a good friend of mine, retired now, but his table was next to mine. So we were sitting next to each other except separated by the space between the two tables. And the jury came in, the potential jury came in, and they sat down, and he was sitting there. And so I reached down into my briefcase and I pulled out a Bible, and it said Holy Bible on the binding, and I slammed it down on the table, and he looked over and saw it, and he jumped up and said, "Objection! Mr. Hogan has the Bible on his table." And as soon as he said it, you could see him going, "Oh no, I've been had." And so I stood up very slowly and said, "I apologize, Your Honor. I had no idea that just having the Bible on my table would be so objectionable. The word of the Lord would be objectionable to Mr. So-and-so."
Wasn't that the thing that they just put their hands on?
Exactly. And so, then he looked bad in front of the jury. So it was fun. There were a lot of fun things you could do during a trial.
Now, one of your mottos for the Hogan Law Firm is "We mean business." Tell us about that.
It was something that I came up with when we opened the law firm, and it just because it has two different connotations, and we got a service mark, a trademark for it, and in fact I've licensed it to a few other firms out in California, and I get paid a little royalty for it.
Really?
So yeah.
Also, does your law firm actually handle licensings and things like that?
Yeah, we do. But what we mean business could mean, we're aggressive, or it could mean we're a business law firm. We
exactly
take care of business. So we handle some licensing, we handle some trademarking. We don't do patent work. That's a little more specialized than what we can do here, because there's just not enough of it for us to become patent lawyers. You have to have a specific field of knowledge. And almost all patent lawyers, that's all they do is practice patent law. But so We Mean Business has been with us for the 30 years that we've been here.
Now, what other, like, is there, like, business litigation that you guys specialize in?
Business litigation, and like I said earlier, Mr. Napolitano does divorce litigation.
Yes.
We do probate litigation. Some people might be surprised as to how contentious probates can be,
No.
which probate can be avoided if you have a trust, which we can provide you. But
Trust or a will.
no, a will won't avoid
Okay,
probate.
on the business
Only a
side.
trust.
Yes.
Yeah.
But what about international business? I mean, more and more, I mean, we have a lot of Caribbean nations
Mm-hmm.
around the state of Florida, so islands.
Yes.
Do you handle international law of any kind?
Yes, I had a business in the Virgin Islands, in St. Thomas, for several years in the early 2000s. And prior to that, in the 90s, I was representing Innovative Technology, which was a local manufacturer here, owned by Dennis and Pam Wolfong, who became very, very good friends of mine and still are. And they wanted to expand internationally, and we researched how to start, where to start, and actually I'd seen a show on PBS about the economic growth in Thailand, which was exponential. If they ever had a dip that went down to 10% growth, they just thought they were in the depths of a depression.
Oh, wow, yeah, 10% growth is like, oh, we've had it.
We've had it, and I had a friend in Korea, but he knew a lot about Thailand, and he was with the American Chamber of Commerce. I called him, and he got us some good contacts in Thailand, and so we started there, and entered into several successful contracts there for distributorships for his product.
So you handle those kind of things. So as for business overseas contracts, so is there a common international law when it comes to this stuff, or is it country to country?
It's country to country, and you have to learn the customs and the do's and the don'ts of how to do business in those countries. And a lot of what I found is a lot of, especially the Asian countries, move at a much, let's say, more genteel pace than we do. You may have when you go to the meeting, then initially you have to share coffee or tea and have casual conversation for an hour. And then you may have a business discussions for an hour or two, and then they want to take you to lunch to a nice restaurant, which by the time you get in the cars and go and get back, there's another 2 hours gone. And then you may have another hour and a half, 2 hours in the afternoon of business, and then they want to take you to dinner. And so it takes a long time to accomplish anything. And then they want, when you're through discussing the business opportunity for them, the contract, they want to think about it, and sometimes they want you to come back. And of course, it's a long trip and it's an expensive trip, but the reward, if you get it, is big. But
the process of wearing you down.
The process of getting it done is very difficult. I talked to Jeb Bush one time before he was in politics, and he was representing an irrigation company in Thailand, an irrigation company that product was manufactured here, and he was trying to help sell it in Thailand. And he shared the same experience, that it just took several years to get them to make a decision.
Now, is it that, what do you think the hang-up is? Is it just the culture of, well, we get it done whenever, or is it that, they don't have a system to get it done?
It's the culture, mainly. It's the culture of, we don't want to be rushed into anything. It's the culture of, we have to learn to trust you, because they've had, most of those Asian countries have been colonized at one time or another, or taken over by the Japanese during the war, or experienced some other situation where they've been dominated, especially by the British or the Dutch back in the 1700s. And so when you go to those countries, you better not have the little brown brother attitude, as they call it. They want to get comfortable and know that you respect them and that you're dealing with them on equal terms. You view them as equal to you, an equal person.
Well, an equal partner in the transaction.
A partner, that's a good way of putting it. And it takes a long time to build up that trust. So they don't like to move at a real quick pace because they have that experience of years and years and years of being taken advantage of. And so business, especially with a foreigner, moves at a slow pace.
Well, especially if you're a smaller company, I guess it's a little bit different than the bigger companies. Right. You're dealing with, by the time the CEOs get to the table to sign, that's already been done many times by all the other chains of command.
Exactly.
They already did that work.
All right. And we were a small. My client's company was, by comparison to an IBM or something, a small company.
Oh yeah.
So you are going in and having to establish your reputation, establish the reliability of the product, making them feel comfortable that they can put their name on the product and it won't disgrace them. So it's a lot of work.
Well, international businesses can be very rewarding, but can be very time-consuming.
Very time-consuming.
Because you're dealing with language, you're dealing with culture, you're dealing with many miles, you're dealing with shipping transactions, and unless you have eyes on the ground,
yes, it's
very difficult.
Very difficult.
That's why most companies that have enough product, they usually have a liaison in country to oversee the packaging, the shipment, make sure that freight is what they ordered.
Exactly.
And not the rejects.
Well, there's all of that, and then there's sometimes there's not the law enforcement that we have here that sometimes we take for granted. We talked a minute ago about protecting citizens from the government, but we also rely on the government to make sure that shipments aren't tampered with and that sort of thing. And in some foreign countries, those things don't happen unless you pay a bribe. And
well, it's extended fees.
Extended fees, but I've had situations specifically in Jakarta one time, and we were trying to leave the country, and we had a lot of equipment that my client used to test or to show that his product was superior to other products. So he brought a lot of test equipment with him, and we had already prepaid through a freight forwarder for all of the travel of this equipment. And we got to the gate at the airport in Jakarta, and they wanted an additional $300. And my client said, "I'm not paying that." And I said, "Hey, calm down. We're not in America."
Pay it.
I went to the guy and I said, "How about, instead of 300, how about 150?" And he said, "Okay, well, I might take one." I said, "This is really just for you, right?" And he said, "Yes, it's for me." So I said, "Okay, well, then let's negotiate something that we can agree on." And so we got him down to 150, and I told my client, I said, "My advice is pay it and let's get out of here, because this guy can make our lives miserable."
And because that's what you're dealing with. I mean, here in the United States, sometimes people forget that we can't extend our culture of rules when you're stuck with people with guns around you.
Exactly.
They said $300. You got to pay the $300. That's their form of taxation.
Yes, and the police officer standing right near us had a submachine gun, and I did not want to spend the night in a Jakarta jail
or any place. I mean, every time sometimes when traveling overseas, we see sometimes, even now, we see sometimes military type personnel with full body gear on.
Yeah.
I mean, we've never seen that before.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we saw normal, either police or security. But when you travel overseas, I mean, they're walking around with submachine guns, rifles, and we're not talking about people just, they happen to be there. We're talking they're everywhere.
Yes.
And they want you to know
Yes.
that don't trip.
Right.
Because you might get shot before you hit the floor.
Exactly. And they're looking at you.
And don't move quickly. I got to get to my gate. Don't move too quickly.
Don't run.
Don't run.
Yeah.
Especially if you're running in their direction.
Or running away. That might be even worse. I don't know.
I mean, I have seen a few interesting things where it's like if you're running in the wrong direction and you know, and someone makes a scream or something, you know, they're watching you run as a scream took place.
Yes.
You know, it
Yeah.
had nothing to do with anything.
Yeah.
And everyone's trigger finger is at the ready.
Yeah, the safeties are clicking off.
Exactly.
And, yeah.
I've seen that happen to where it's like, damn, like, I'll move over here. Let's see, where is the ballistic table?
Right.
You know, what's that, you know, duck and cover?
Yep.
And so it's very interesting when you travel overseas. Most people don't understand how, as much as we think TSA and all these things are impediments, overseas it's a whole different scenario.
Especially if you're in third world countries, it is very intimidating.
And that's the point. You know, they don't have people like yourself, the legal system, the lawyers, all that stuff. It's all done in the moment of time.
Yes.
And it's like, that's what happened.
Yeah.
And, you know, you can't just go out and try to investigate because there's nothing to investigate.
Right.
There is no judiciary if it ever gets to one.
Right.
Is there anything that we missed in our conversation? We're pretty much done with all of the cool things, and there might be something that I've missed.
Well, I would like to. A minute ago, you asked me about people that I've stayed in touch with over the years, and I would like to tell this one story for Dennis Wilfong and Pam Wilfong. They've been after me for years to record it.
Oh, okay.
And so I'd like
There
to
we go.
tell
We're
it.
Recording the story.
In 1991, soon after I'd started representing their company, they received a letter from the Minister of Oil for Nigeria. Now, this was before the big
before
Nigeria scam thing became known.
Exactly. It was actually the minister this time.
It was.
This was the actual minister.
Actual minister, and it was for a huge multi-million-dollar transaction, and they wanted me to go over there and check it out and see, how far I could get with the contract and so forth. And I said,
actually confirm the check.
Confirm it, yeah. And so I said, so I checked with the U.S. Department of Commerce. I flew up to Washington, met with them, and showed them the letter and told them of the phone discussions that took place before my involvement. And they said, yes, this is legitimate. This is a great deal for our country. This is a good chance for us to export rather than import, and we encourage you to pursue it. Went to our congressman, who at that time was Cliff Stearns, and they said, yeah, this guy's the oil minister. I don't see anything wrong with it. So I said, okay, I'll go. And so I flew over there with the president of the company, whose name was Dean Beagle. He's passed away now, unfortunately. He's a great man. But we studied the customs and culture, and it was customary to bring gifts for people and so forth. So he bought a lot of nice watches, not Rolexes or anything, but nice watches to give out as gifts. And we had reservations at the Sheraton in Lagos, Nigeria. We flew into Nigeria, and the first thing that happened is we were met at the plane by someone from said they were from the Ministry of Oil.
Were they armed?
They weren't armed, but there were lots of armed people around, lots of the machine guns around. And I said, well, I need to go exchange some money for local currency. And they said, oh, no, you won't need any money while you're here. Well, a little light went off in my brain that said, I never like to be anywhere without cash.
Exactly.
So I excused myself for the restroom, but instead went to an exchange window and got a lot more cash than I had intended to get.
That was a better clue.
Yes.
You don't need any money.
Yeah.
I need more money
I
now.
need more money. And so we said we want to go to the Sheraton. And they said, no, we've got a different hotel where we want you to put you up in. So they put us in a cab, and off we go out into the darkness. I mean, this place, you don't know how dark somewhere can be that doesn't have electricity.
They took you to a safari hotel?
Well, it was a 7-story building, but it had a wall around it with containment wire and a gate. And it was in the middle of nowhere. And so we go in.
That was another clue, right?
Yes. And they put us up on the 7th floor, and they said, we want to meet with you in half an hour. So first thing I did was start hiding money all over the place in different, shoes and cubby holes in my suitcase and all that sort of thing. Hid my passport, plane ticket. And so the meeting was going to be in Dean's room. And I told him, I said, if you get the feeling that something's wrong,
we're done.
We
don't even know where you are.
Yeah. Well, if you get the feeling...
You could run where?
You couldn't. Well, I said, if you get the feeling something's wrong, use my full name, Thomas S. Hogan Jr. So when I got down to his room, these folks were already there, and they were in the room, and he was handing out watches, and he said, oh, come in, Thomas S. Hogan Jr. So right off the bat, something was wrong, and Dean was a smoker, and he was lighting one cigarette after another,
chaining,
and they were like blowtorches. He was just sucking them down,
One puff,
one drag, and it was done. And so these guys said, "We want the first thing you have to do is give us $35,000."
Was that all?
I was like, "Yeah, is that all?" And this transaction is going to take. When is your return flight? With 3 days. So, this is going to take longer than 3 days. So give us your plane tickets and your passports, and we'll go get you a plane ticket out for in a week, 10 days or something. And so I said, look, wait a minute. I said, we don't have cash. Americans don't carry cash. You should know that. It's all credit card. I said, but I can get you cash.
At the airport, right?
From Western.
Right in front of my flight.
Should have thought of that. I can get it from you from Western Union in the. But I won't do it if you take our plane tickets and our passports. I won't cooperate. And so they had a little huddle, and they decided, okay, we'll be back in the morning to take you to Western Union. So they left, and so I said to Dean, I said, I'm going to go downstairs and see if they left anybody here to watch us. So I go downstairs, with my blazer on and my khaki pants, and I go in, and sure enough, there's one of the guys down there between me and the exit, sitting in front of the front desk. So I turned.
They didn't have an Uber line outside?
No. But there was a line of cabs out front, which I noticed. And I turned and went into the bar. And of course, now there's this tall, pale, white Irish guy in the bar in khaki pants and a blue blazer ordering a 7-Up. So. That
strong?
Yeah. So I went back up to the room and I said, Dean, I said, we have to get out of here. I got all my stuff in my room. I had just a carry-on bag.
Traveling
light. And I said, we got to go. We got to get out of here because this isn't going to turn out well. I just have a feeling. And he said, okay, do you think we can? I said, yeah, if we go down the fire escape. And of course he said, do you think we can outrun them? I said, I don't know, but I know I can outrun you because you're a chain smoker. And so we went down and we got in quietly down the fire escape, and we got into the last cab in line quietly.
And
I gave him a bunch of money. And so he started driving out. They opened the gate and we got out. And so we were just, on pins and needles. We told them we wanted to go to Lagos to the Sheraton. We get stopped by a Jeep full of military guys with Uzis, and we couldn't understand what they were saying. We couldn't understand the cab driver, but they kept taking the guns and poking us, and then wanting to look in the briefcases and the luggage, and so we're showing them everything. And finally, I started handing out cash.
Exactly.
And they let us go. And we got to the Sheraton, and I said, I'm going to the airport and see when we can get out. And we couldn't get out until the next morning on a Swiss Air flight to Germany. Anywhere, yes, but to Frankfurt, Germany. It was a big rigmarole. They said, we have to have a photocopy of the front page of your passport. I said, okay, but I'm going with my passport to the copy machine.
Yeah, you ain't taking this thing.
Yeah,
with you.
And they said, well, we don't have a copy machine. And I said, well, where is the copy? They said, the nearest one's at a music store down the street. I mean, it's things like that.
Yes.
So I went back, got Dean. We go down in the morning, and we're heading out, try to get on the plane. And they had a row of desks set up down this hallway that you had to stop at every desk to get out. Every desk wanted a fee for something.
Yeah, it's a fee.
And
it's like, let's not go into that.
Let's not go into it, but it was definitely graft, corruption. As much cash as I had taken, I ran out.
Wow.
And I had three desks to go. So I gave away this guy a polo shirt. I gave this next guy a belt. The last guy I gave a pair of pants or something to. I don't know.
You walked on the plane on your boxers?
Yeah, no, not in the pants I was wearing, but I would have given them up to get out of there.
If the last desk was like, all right, just take the suit.
To take it.
The size? What size is it?
But I got to the steps of the plane, and I looked back, and the two of these guys that we'd met with were holding Dean. And so I walked a little ways back towards them, and I said, look, I can identify you guys, and so if you don't let him go, I'm going to get on that plane, and I'm going to be telling Interpol, what's happening. So they let him go. And so now we're flying to Germany, and I'm thinking, did I overreact? Did I?
Yeah, like the minister was like, what happened?
Yeah, we have a suitcase full of money for you.
It's like,
and I get to.
That wasn't on the agenda. You should have told us beforehand.
Yeah, that's common, but anyway, we got home, and the planes changed so quickly we didn't have time to call anybody. We got to the airport in Orlando, and I had made a quick call that we would be in Orlando at a certain time. Please pick us up. We flew all night, Frankfurt, back to Orlando, and when we got there, everybody was crying and hugging us and all, because after we left, they had gotten a phone call from Cliff Stearns saying, don't let them go, because we just found out that there's this big scam where they kidnapped the businessmen. There's been several businessmen that have never come back. Their passports are used by drug dealers, and they're never seen again. So that was a close call, and that's for you, Dennis and Pam.
That's for you traveling out there. Actually, I make it a point to make sure I make digital copies of the documents.
Yes.
So you could always get into the United States with those codes and the copies.
Yes. Well, this predates. This was back in the early 90s.
Exactly. But having digital copies when you travel is very important, because you will find, because the hotels will take your passport.
Yeah.
When you're traveling through countries and you're staying at a hotel in many of these foreign countries, they will hold your passport at the hotel lobby as part of you staying there, which is kind of weird, but
and scary.
It's like you turn around, anyone can grab your passport, make copies, or who knows what is, how they're used. It's just front desk people.
Yeah.
It's not like, there's no such thing as security, by the way.
And ID security is non-existent in those situations.
Exactly. So